Hello and welcome to my story. Today's story is called The Jellyfish. I've seen some strange things in the ocean. I tell you, strange things in the ocean. But this yellow jellyfish, it was just crazy looking. So, I'm telling you, I've been diving since college. I'm in my late 30s now. And I've gotten somewhere around 80 dives logged, give or take. My buddy Ryan has about the same. We're not professionals by any means, but we're not beginners either. We've done enough to be comfortable at depth, which is probably what made this whole thing possible in the first place. This happened back in 2016 during a trip we took to Roatan, Honduras. There's a cargo wreck out there about 110 feet that's supposed to be a solid advanced dive. The site checked all the boxes. It was a good structure, not too technical, and there was decent marine life. We went out with a small local operation, maybe 6 divers total on the boat. The dive master gave us the standard briefing. Stay above 100 feet. The wreck sits on a slope, so the stern drops deeper. Don't penetrate the structure. 25 minutes max bottom time. We obviously took him seriously, but I have to admit most of my attention was elsewhere, as was Ryan's. We heard it all before. We descended, and the wreck was awesome. It was this big rusted hole with lots of structure to look at. This was maybe 60 feet, which is solid for that depth. We were swimming along the port side when we drifted toward the stern, which angled down the slope into deeper water. I checked my computer and it read 105 feet, which was essentially right at the limit. But those limits are extremely cautionary, which I knew, and so did Ryan. So I wasn't too concerned about pushing things slightly. I was extremely confident in my abilities at that age, perhaps a little overconfident. And being with a daring guy like Ryan just amplified that self-assurance. As we kept swimming, I realized the lower section of the deck looked interesting. There was a large opening in the hole where the cargo hatch had rusted through, and you could see down onto the deck plating inside. Like I said, interesting. Ryan must have been thinking the same thing because he had already started descending without even glancing back at me. I kept thinking to myself, when am I going to get a chance again? Probably never get this chance. Diving spots are particularly infinite, and I know there was a good chance I'd never be in Honduras again, let alone at that site. So I followed him. We dropped to about 120 feet, then a little further. I was aware we were pushing it, but the wreck was compelling. And like I said before, Ryan was already ahead of me. Plus, splitting up while on a dive that deep was arguably less safe than what we were doing. Ryan abruptly stopped swimming, paused for a few seconds, then turned and gave me a signal. He was pointing at something on the deck just inside the hatch opening. I swam over and looked down. It actually took me a few seconds to properly process what I was seeing. There was something unnatural sitting on the rusted deck plating. I initially processed it as a jellyfish because that's what it was. And I want to be as clear as possible about what I was looking at. It was wrong. It was bright yellow, not dull yellow or brownish. Yellow, but bright, brilliant, and vivid, almost fluorescent, which was impossible. If you'd ever been below 100 feet, you know that color doesn't exist down there. I'm not sure how it works, but at depth, the water filters out warm light, so everything just looks blue and green. At 130 feet, which is around where we were, you could hold a red marble in front of your face and it would look gray. But this jellyfish looked like a mini light source. It was screaming yellow. At the time, I didn't feel scared. If anything, seeing it actually excited me. I got this uncontrollable, almost childish urge to start laughing, which I had to physically suppress. I kept looking at it. It was about the size of a basketball, slightly flattened, and it had texture to it. Folds and ridges like the surface of a brain. It was swaying very delicately back and forth, but it wasn't pulsating the way jellyfish normally would. It was just kind of sitting there on the metal. After a little while, my excitement faded away, but I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Ryan and I hovered over it, and at that point, I felt something that I still have trouble describing. I was completely locked in, but also zoned out, sort of like I was forgetting where I was and what I was doing. I later found out that Ryan experienced the same thing. So the two of us were circling around this mysterious jellyfish without really understanding what it was. At one point, I saw Ryan extend his hand toward this thing. I watched him do it, and it didn't occur to me to stop him. He pulled it back before making contact, but I barely even reacted. And then all of a sudden, my dive computer started screaming at me. Looked down, and it snapped me out of whatever haze I had been in. We were at 100 134 feet. And we had been at depth for almost 30 minutes. We had been there for almost 30 minutes. 134 feet, and my air was at 600 psi. Which, if you don't dive, that's emergency level. Yes. You are supposed to start heading up at 700. Ryan checked his, and his was worse. I looked at him, and he looked like he had just woken up, which was exactly how I felt. The next 10 minutes or so are kind of blurry. We ascended way too fast because we didn't have the air to do it properly. We did the best safety stops we could on what we had left, but it was bad. The next thing I remember is getting yelled at by the dive master, who was obviously furious, and he should have been. I had a pounding headache for hours afterward, and it was unlike any pain I had ever experienced. Ryan was worse. He threw up twice before we even made it back to the shore. And I remember feeling so bad for all the other divers we were with, especially the dive master. This isn't super relevant, but I ended up tipping him basically all the cash I had on me. Fast forward to later that night, and Ryan and I basically made a full recovery. We were just lounging in the hotel because neither of us wanted to do a thing besides sleep. We spent a good 20 minutes or so talking about the jellyfish we had seen down there, trying to figure out if there was some sort of fluorescent species or something else that could have explained it. I don't know. Ryan suddenly remembered that he had recorded the entire dive with his GoPro, which I had also completely forgotten about on account of the decompression sickness. The two of us watched the footage back, and Ryan skipped ahead to the part where we had seen it. I kept anticipating a yellow glow flooding the screen. But here's the thing. It never did. For about 8.5 minutes, the footage showed the two of us hovering over a bare section of rusted deck, bleeding. There was no jellyfish. It was worse than that. There was nothing there at all. No object of any kind. We were circling a completely empty patch of metal. The entire thing had been a hallucination, which was a terrifying thought. It was obviously nitrogen narcosis. At 130 feet on air, you can absolutely get narked. The effects vary: impaired judgment, euphoria, fixation on objects, loss of time, awareness, and several other things. That's the medical explanation, and it fits almost perfectly, except for one thing. We both saw the same exact thing. We both saw it. We didn't talk about it underwater, obviously, because you can't. But when we later described it to each other independently, it matched the color, the size, the texture, the way it sat on the deck, everything. Ryan described the membrane-like ridges the same way I remembered them. Narcosis obviously doesn't work this way. It's an individual response. Two divers at the same depth, at the same time, will experience different symptoms. One might feel euphoric while the other gets anxious. Shared visual hallucinations with identical physical details aren't a documented feature of nitrogen neurosis. I don't think that would even be possible. I really don't. Not possible at all. I looked this up obsessively for weeks. After we got home, but found nothing. Conclusion: there's nothing on earth that can cause a shared visual hallucination. Ryan and I kept diving together for a few years after that incident, but we eventually fell out of touch. I still dive when I get a chance, but things just got too busy, and I never changed. This is still something I don't fully understand, and probably never will. The thing that gets me isn't what we saw. It isn't what we saw. I can live with not knowing what it was. I can live with that. The thing that gets me is that the two of us had the same hallucination. How's that possible? The only plausible explanation I could think of that Ryan's narcosis effects were so much worse than mine that he just remembered what I described. I don't know. But I swear he described details about that jellyfish before I did that he couldn't even have possibly known if he hadn't seen it as well. Everyone I've told the story to thinks it's something supernatural. And I've seen and I've since changed my viewpoint about that stuff because of it. And that's the end of my story. Hope you enjoyed it. That was about the jellyfish. If you like my story, please hit that like button and please subscribe. Prescribe. I appreciate it. Have a good day.